I just want to say thank you guys for coming, and I want to say a special thank you to the tech team because I spent about 10 years doing convention production, so it's a thankless job. And I just really appreciate all the help, and everything here is great. So thank you very much.
Yeah, that's great. So my name is Peter Holmstrom. I'm a screenwriter and nonfiction author. I have a book coming out December called Icons on Earth, Star Wars, which is a companion book to the documentary series you guys might have watched a couple of years ago. So please check that out. It's all about the history of George Lucas's Star Wars film.
Oh, and I'm Daniel. I've made some films. I have a film, spy movie called Smuggler's Ransom that I directed, a film called RZ9 that I edited. They're both on Tubi. You can watch those. We love Tubi because it's free to you, and there's ads, and it's great. I'm also in the marketing department at Fox. I work in the strategic promo planning department, but this is my first podcast. Peter and I have a podcast together. And if you actually click on this QR code, you get all our links. So please check that out. You can get the podcast. It's all about young Indiana Jones. We got some great Star Wars stuff. So thank you guys.
Yeah, great. If you were in the moviegoing audience in 1999, you were raised to expect movies would have a certain scope. No matter what the genre, the setting, the budget, no matter what the show promised in the trailers, a movie would exist in a certain framework. Worlds might be described, masses of cities discussed, battles glimpsed, sci-fi splendor hinted at, but rarely would you ever actually represent reality. In reality, battles have tens of thousands of people, cities have hundreds of thousands to millions of people. Sci-fi landscapes exist at the brim of imagination. But cinema was limited at what they could show, not because of lack of imagination, but just because of budget and technology. Even the big budget epics like Braveheart or Lawrence of Arabia could only show hundreds of extras in costumes at any given time. Moviegoers were trained to expect certain representations of events. Battles were said to encompass hundreds of thousands, were only shown to have hundreds. Cities said to have millions of people in them could only showcase small areas and limited populations. That all changed in 1998 when moviegoers saw the first trailer for the new Star Wars film, The Phantom Menace. Yes, we know you've all seen this before. But.
Refer to the prophecy of the one who will bring balance to the Force. You believe it's this boy?
He can see things before they happen.
He can help you.
The Force is unusually strong with him.
He was meant to help you.
Anakin! Tell him to take off!
Will I ever see you again?
What does your heart tell you?
Are you sure about this? Trusting our fate to a boy we hardly know?
Anakin Skywalker, meet Obi-Wan Kenobi.
I sense much fear in you.
The boy is dangerous. They all sense it. Why can't you?
Fear is the path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering.
Still holds up. Now, the first trailer for The Phantom Menace wasn't just promoting the film and reintroducing people to Star Wars. It was also a statement. It was a statement by George Lucas and Lucasfilm to say that cinema as you knew it would never be the same again. The very paradigm of film had changed. Armies could now be represented by thousands rather than dozens. Sci-fi cultures could be presented in whatever imagination could come up with. The nature of cinematic spectacle had itself shifted. For years, George Lucas and Rip McCallum have talked about how the technology showcased in Star Wars Prequels was first developed and refined in the sadly forgotten show, The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. As if for all this time, George was just kind of biding his time, getting someone else to fund research into this technology he was going to one day use on the Star Wars prequels. But what we're here to contend today is that, in fact, it was the other way around. The main goal of Lucasfilm with these technological expansions was, in fact, Young Indiana Jones. And when that failed to succeed, George and Rick picked up the building blocks of Young Indy, both in terms of technology and also in terms of story and theme, and repurposed them into Star Wars. So, to paraphrase the maker, let's take you back now to a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
So we know probably a lot of you have not seen Young Indiana Jones. It was a very difficult series to see for a very long time. So we have a little clip. This is actually from our podcast. It's a brief introduction to the series. We're going to play it here. It's mostly audio. There's no need to dim the lights. But here you go. In 1989, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade is released in the summer. It's a big hit. And I think one of the things people still remember about that movie is the opening, which follows this young, this child version of Indiana Jones. And it's a great, fun sequence. And clearly, this sticks with George Lucas.
The Young Indiana Jones Chronicles premieres on March 4th, 1992, with a 90-minute pilot episode on ABC. So I think it's important to note is that ABC wasn't actually owned by Disney at that point.
This show that is connected to one of the most popular and successful film franchises of all time, adjacent to the most popular film franchise of all time. And yet it somehow is not even a footnote in all these conversations. That's Dracula there at the end. It does make an appearance in the series. So you get that's a quick view of the history. But essentially, it was a series that was put on TV and it didn't work. So I'm going to explain briefly the history of it. The premise of the show is that in the early 1900s, the show operated in two time periods. You had a young Indiana Jones played by an actor named Corey Carrier, about 8 to 10 years old, and then a teenage Indiana Jones played by Sean Patrick Flannery. The majority of the series features Flannery. It's about a third of Corey Carrier and 2/3 Flannery. 44 hours were produced in total. In the Corey Carrier version, actually let me do this so I can just point at the screen. In the Corey Carrier version, he's accompanied by his father and his mother and his tutor, who by oversight on my part is not pictured here. But they are traveling the world on a lecture tour, and so during this format, young Indy gets to visit all sorts of places and things, learn languages, and it's sort of the beginning of his education. But the meat of the story arc really kicks off with Flannery, where he decides to run away and join World War I. He starts by joining Pancho Villa in Mexico, which is a line that's referenced in The Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which is a lot of people obviously have seen, and he tells Shia LaBeouf that story. But that's basically the first episode, which is what you see here. This is the poster for the pilot. After that, he goes to Europe and Africa and fights in the war. This gentleman here is an actor named Ronnie Couture, who plays a character named Remy, who is sort of a sidekick to Indiana Jones and sort of inverts the sidekick trope by being older. We like to speculate he's a Francis Ford Coppola stand-in for Lucas, kind of like Han Solo is in the original Star Wars trilogy. World-weary, has a bit of vice, maybe not the best influence on young Indiana Jones, but also very competent, and they have a lot of adventures together. One really notable thing is that, as originally released, all the episodes were bookended by this actor, a man named George Hall, who played a 92-year-old Indiana Jones, and was usually talking to someone, sometimes on the street, sometimes in a museum, and saying like, I was wherever, and that would seg into the episode. We're going to talk more about this because you will not be able to find this anywhere because there have been changes, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
The prequel format was not unique at the time, partly because of Star Wars. The studio's understanding of what audiences wanted shifted. Previous to that, studios figured movies should be catered to adults, but also sanitary enough to bring kids along to. After Star Wars, it became no, we actually need to cater to children and teenagers, because then, by definition, they have to bring their parents with them. So in the 1980s, you had a lot of either prequel films, TV shows, or kind of aging down of franchise characters. James Bond Jr., which is a long-forgotten animated show, obviously hiring Timothy Dalton to be James Bond. But there was also work done on a prequel James Bond movie, which never got produced, and also a prequel Star Trek movie called Starfleet Academy, which also never got produced. But also Superboy, Muppet Babies, many examples of franchises and studios really catering to the youthful demographic.
So going back to how Young Indiana Jones was released, it started in 1992 on ABC, ran for 2 seasons. It was a late season replacement. In our podcast, we actually got to speak to one of the marketing people from ABC at the time, and she explained that it was originally slated to come out the previous fall of 1991, and it was delayed, and so it makes it to the air in March of 1992, and we call that in TV now sort of a late mid-season replacement. And only 6 episodes aired in the first season, and they did well, especially the pilot, won the night and had great ratings. It saw some drop-off, but still in 6 episodes, it was a respectable series. It returns in the fall of 93, and that's really, or excuse me, 92, and that's really where the trouble starts from the rating in a serious way. And it airs all through 1993, and by the end of the 1993 season, it's airing on Saturday morning. It's not getting good time slots. People are not watching. There are several episodes that probably, even if you were watching the show, you probably didn't see. It was just a really messy thing. So by summer of July of 1993, the show was officially canceled, and by all rights should have ended there. However, George Lucas is a persistent man, and so he was able to make a deal with the Family Channel, which was a cable network at the time, a privately owned cable network. And we learned in our interview with Rick McCallum was that they were able to secure $8 million in funding to deliver 4 TV movies, because the Family Channel wanted that format. The pilot of the series had been the most successful. They'd experimented with TV movies on the ABC run. It made a lot of sense. Rick let us know they were able to make it for $5.8 million, something he was very proud of, and they were able to use that money to produce more content, which we'll speak about in a minute, actually. Because, between, these were in 94 through 96. Between 96 and 99, you would not find this series anywhere. It didn't exist. It was not on video. In Japan, there was a Laserdisc, but in the United States, it was inaccessible. In 1999, following the release of The Phantom Menace, the Indiana Jones movies are re-released with some fanfare on VHS, and 12 Young Indiana Jones now movies are released, because these films have been completely redone. And I actually have a trailer to show you for this release right now.
Paramount and Lucasfilm take you back to where the Indiana Jones legend began. From master storyteller George Lucas comes the adventures of young Indiana Jones. 12 new-to-video features. Filmed in more than 100 cities and 25 countries around the globe. All the action, all the intrigue, all the exciting exploits of the young man who not only witnessed history, he made it. The Adventures of Young Indiana Jones. 12 collectible all-new-to-video films. Available now wherever your favorite videos are sold. And look for more adventures in the new millennium. They're the adventures that made the man, and the man who became the legend.
So what they did was they took the 44 hours that at that point had been produced, including 2 hours that were produced with that extra money I mentioned and never released in any way, and created 22 television films. They shot new footage. Jonathan Hales, who we interview on the podcast, was brought in to write new scenes, create plot lines to bridge episodes that were perhaps not intended to be together. There were many episodes that were aired as effectively 2-parters, and those are relatively unchanged. Most notably, of course, this gentleman was removed completely. The only remaining evidence of his involvement is the last shot of the credits when you see a hand close a book, and that is his hand, right? Seemed like a nice guy. It's always unfortunate, but that was the creative choice that was made. But things were added in. More material with Indy's mother and some of the early films was added, particularly in the final sort of Corey Carrier film, Journey of Radiance. There's a plot line where she becomes ill, and this is sort of intended to portend her eventual death, as we know from the movies. That she and then later in the series, the young Indy Flannery's Indy talks about how his mother died, I believe, of the flu, Spanish flu, and so this sets that up, right? It was a little bit of a hint. They don't depict it, but it's like it gives you that sense of, okay, something is coming, and that was all added, right? So, and there's even new lines of Carrier at the end of the Peking episode referencing the Benares episode. There's no way that was a part of the original broadcast. Not that we have it to look at because you can't find it, but it would make no sense to be in the original version, right? So things like that bring these films together. Mm-hmm. Finally,
Yeah, and the final word on Young Indy from George Lucas came in 2007-2008 with the release of the DVDs. Now, what George did there, and this was around the time of the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull release, George was able to kind of finagle the release out of Paramount. Paramount really wanted the Indiana Jones trilogy on DVD, and George says, well, you can have it, but we also need to release Young Indiana Jones. So you get this 3-volume set, and what also is great about this set is that not only does it include the entire series, movie format, but also it includes 94 historical documentaries. A key thing with George for the series was wanting to educate. He felt like the education system in America was going downhill, which he was right. And he thought that this is a great way to trick people into learning about history and learning about real events. And so the documentaries included documentaries about the real historical events, real historical people, documentaries about very obscure subjects that you'd never find on the History Channel, presented here for the first time.
Well, it's worth pointing out, Lucasfilm has actually been re-releasing these documentaries over the last year on YouTube for free. So if you're interested in that, those are easy to get. You go to Lucasfilm, the Lucasfilm YouTube channel, and there'll be a playlist there with, I think, all of them at this point. If not, they will soon be all available. So they always love us to mention that if we can. So obviously, the subtitle of this is The Origins of the Star Wars Prequels, and Peter touched on that at the beginning. There are really two elements of that we want to touch on today, and there's probably more, but those are the two main ones. And there's the technological, which we're going to talk about right now, and then the thematic, which we'll close with. The goal of the series was obviously to recreate the world of 1908 and then 1916 to 1920 in the 90s. So there are a lot of challenges with that, and they actually wanted a higher degree of fidelity to in terms of the location than were in the Indiana Jones films. Here's a great example of that. At the top, you see a scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark that is supposedly set in Cairo. This was actually shot in Tunisia. There's no, and Robert Watts, the producer, is very proud of this and has said in his interviews, we didn't need to see the pyramids, so we didn't go to Egypt. It's expensive to shoot in Egypt. Well, the first episode of Young Indiana Jones, whether you're watching it in the new version or the old version, they go to Egypt, and Young Indy climbs the pyramids, right? And I saw that as sort of a statement of like, no, we're going to do it, right? And there are a couple other examples of this. You'll see these are all real, this is from the movies. Temple of Doom, they use Sri Lanka for India. And then this is actually shot in Spain, even though it's supposed to be like maybe Jordan, Turkey. It's unclear exactly where they're supposed to be. The movie says Republic of Haiti, H-A-T-A-Y, which I always thought was fake. It's not. Look it up. It's a really fascinating story. But here are some examples of the series of real location work using, of course, modern 90s locations for their historical counterparts. Up there is sort of the African bush. This is Barcelona, real locations in Barcelona. This is actually shot in Turkey, in Istanbul, at the Hagia Sophia, which, when you look closely at it, it's all shot at a distance, and the audio's dubbed, and I'm speculating that they actually snuck this footage and they weren't supposed to get it, but who knows, you never get a solid answer on that. And then this is St. Petersburg. They were one of the first productions to go to Russia. They actually kind of shot this as the Soviet Union was collapsing. It wasn't quite gone yet, when they were there. And we talked to Simon Windsor, the director, on the podcast, and he told some great stories of getting in and out of Russia and shooting in Russia that were great. But obviously there are limitations. They were able to do this without much technological manipulation, but you can't do that in every instance, and they wanted to keep going. So here are some examples of visual effects breakthroughs that were done on the series. And the top left here, it's small, but the show was shot at low resolution anyway. This is a recreation of the Spanish riding school in Vienna. And Rick McCallum shared that they were able to secure a location in Prague that had similar architecture. You can see it there, where it's one story. And it was similar to the riding school, and that they, of course, tried to shoot at the real riding school, and they were denied permission. So a matte painter, Yusei Sugi, who was a big ILM matte painter, you can read about him, used Photoshop, which was brand new technology developed by John Knoll at ILM, to draw this painting to extend the roof of the location. Well, that itself was not new. Matte paintings had existed since the 30s, since Robin Hood. But before, it was always a physical process, painted on glass, or there was blue screen, and things were run through the optical printer. We spoke to Ben Burt about this and the cost of running an optical printer and how it was impractical for television.
Even like Star Wars Empire Strikes Back, you'd have a dozen matte paintings at maximum, but that's all you can do. And the Young Indy was trying to do multiple versions of this per episode.
And that meant weekly, right?
Yeah.
So this was all done electronically. And I say electronically and not digitally because it would be unfair to apply digital to the term because the technology is so rudimentary. It's working with essentially analog video signals that are being combined in a computer, but as a result, there's no optical printing, there's no garbage matte, if you know what that is, there's no artifacts. So it's a clean image. A couple more examples of this here, this ring of horses. They had 12 horses, they shot them in different positions, as you see in the video, and then combined them on this machine. It was called the Harry machine, you can certainly look that up, and created that effect. Here's a simple effect by modern standards, and they made it simple, but it would have been difficult in say, 1985. This is a static image of a ship with some animated smoke. All they really shot was this boat on the river. But what's great about the effect, as you see as it loops, is that that little boat crosses the frame. Very difficult to do that with traditional split screen or optical printing, but with this device, they're able to do what you can do now in After Effects. You know, all this stuff has been brought on, and make that clean composite. Down here is a shot of crowds in St. Petersburg during the Russian Revolution. Again, they had about 30 extras, according to the director Simon Windsor, and they just replicated them by shooting them over and over again and placing them in different positions in the frame. Another Simon Windsor episode here is some soldiers assembling in a staging area. Again, there's maybe about 30 people positioned in different places and then simply replicated over and over again. And lastly, in one of the later episodes, a recreation of New York City in 1920, which is heavily, matte paintings. They were getting really ambitious. Some miniature trolley cars, a couple of prop cars, all shot on a backlot and extended. Lastly, a couple of examples from what they call Young Indiana Jones and the Mystery of the Blues, which is set in Chicago, all shot in North Carolina, mostly on a backlot. What you see here is a funeral procession with a small, but only really what's in the foreground is shot on location. Everything in the background is synthetic. There's a train moving in the background, extra cars, people walking in the funeral procession. Really complicated shot. And then here, this is a shot done by Ben Burt, a second unit director, where Indy is jumping off of this balcony and landing on this car. And it's a simple combination of two shots. One where the actor jumps off the balcony and hits the car where there's a stunt pad, and another where the actor is 2 inches off the car and just kind of drops on. And the shots are merged, and there's a slight fade line, which you won't be able to see in here because it's just, you'd have to have a magnifying glass. But it's nearly seamless, and they were able to do it for a stunt with the actor safely and make it dramatic. That had never been done before. This was 1992 when they were shooting this. You would never have thought of doing that with an actor and putting them in that position. So this is really groundbreaking things that would lead to what they were doing. The Phantom Menace had a lot of digital stunts, accentuated stunts with digital technology, moving actors closer together to make hits land, things like that. All of that is an evolution from this.
And the goal here is to emphasize the scope and grandeur of the past. They could have written the show to be much more contained, much more small. I mean, we've all seen Bonanza or whatever, but instead they were like, no, we actually want to see the scope of the past because it was a big place. And they were able to achieve that with these technological advancements. To do that, they needed a fresh hand. They needed George and Rick McCallum really wanted people who were eager for this new technology, eager for the adventure. So they brought on people, many of whom would carry throughout the Star Wars prequels as well. Rick McCallum, of course, himself is the producer. He was hired for Young Indiana Jones. And then carried on into working on to the special editions as well as Star Wars prequels. Gavin Bouquet was the production designer who was instrumental in bringing so much of the past to life, as well as David Tattersall, who was the DP cinematographer. Trisha Bigger, who deserves so many Oscars but never got them for the Star Wars prequels. She got her start on Young Indiana Jones. Matthew Wood, quite a celebrity now, General Grievous for any of the Clone Wars prequel fan out there, got his start on Young Indy. Nick Gillard worked a little bit on Young Indiana Jones, made that great lightsaber battle in Phantom Menace. Paul Martin Smith, editor. And Jonathan Hales, of course, who was the writer of Attack of the Clones. And lastly, of course, Ben Burt, a legend in the industry, has done so much, but when it comes to Young Indiana Jones, he was really given an opportunity to just play. Like, he had so many jobs on Young Indy. His first directing job was on Young Indiana Jones, and he, as well as many people we've talked to, have just said that Young Indy was truly the best time for them at Lucasfilm. While all this is going on with Young Indiana Jones, Star Wars was rediscovering its life. In 1991, the first fiction book in nearly a decade was released. Lucasfilm's feeling prior to this was that they weren't sure if Star Wars was still a viable property. All the sales figures in the mid-'80s showcased that Star Wars was dying, and the lifespan of franchises in that era was a lot shorter than it is today. So they were shocked when Heir to the Empire came out and it skyrocketed to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. Eventually, the Thrawn trilogy, as it would be called, would end up selling 15 million copies, which is quite a lot. 1992, a year after that, the Dark Empire comic book series relaunched the Star Wars comic line. First issue of that sold 220,000 copies, making it one of the best selling comics of the year. Soon following that, even though there's no new film, there was no new thing to promote, a new toy line started up, and Star Wars toy line was a fixture for anyone who was living in the 1990s. And then very lastly as well, 1990 through 1995, Star Wars was getting a re-release. The original Star Wars trilogy was getting re-released almost yearly on VHS or Laserdisc, which all prompted George to think that maybe there was still life left in Star Wars and something should be done with it. So in 1994, George officially began work on the Star Wars prequels, which coincidentally is about the time that Young Indy wraps up.
The comparisons between the two from a thematic level are a little perhaps obvious on the surface, but then there are some deeper levels that you definitely get into. The first obvious comparison, as you see here, is this idea of doing a prequel that goes back to the main character's childhood, and doing this split timeline show. Both the prequels and the series share that 1/3, 2/3 split, right? Anakin is a kid in episode 1, and then he's played by Hayden Christensen in episodes 2 and 3, with Sean Patrick Finer playing Indiana Jones.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is that when George is looking at the nature of prequels, he's not merely saying that characters are who they were from birth and maybe showing how they got a certain thing that you recognize or whatever. He wanted to take the end goal, the original property that you fell in love with, and say that's the end of a character, and let's think about, like, what is the equation that adds up to that person? What are the building blocks that add up to that life? Because, he really figured that, like, no one is born the way that we are as adults. We change, we grow, we evolve. So he wanted to ask the question of, like, what are those pieces we could showcase in film and TV that can add up to the life of Indiana Jones and of Darth Vader?
Well, couple other similarities to just the overall storyline. Both have the young boy version living in a world where there's conflict, but not an actual war. And then in the second and third acts, there's a massive war, the Clone Wars or World War I, both of which are sort of morally complex and gray conflicts that are not clear, and there are a lot of competing interests. And the characters sort of have to go through this journey of disillusionment, with some of them having a worse outcome than others. They're just much more complex compared to, say, the comparison between World War II and the original Star Wars or the Galactic Civil War. It's a much more black and white conflict, right? So his interest in delving into this complexity of war is reflected in both properties.
Our thesis with this podcast and with this presentation is that Lucas continues down the same schools of thought that he had been developing with Young Indy and applies them to the Star Wars prequels. He was kind of, faced with the sci-fi author's dilemma of, like, he tried to do a story straight, essentially, with Young Indiana Jones, the Dracula episode notwithstanding, and failed. It didn't succeed. It didn't resonate as well with the audience. And so he then takes those ideas, those themes, and applies them to a sci-fi, more palatable setting, and we get to the Star Wars prequels.
And so as we're sort of circling, we have a couple of comparison clips. These are brief moments from Young Indiana Jones compared to some moments from the prequels. This first one features Indy on a spy mission to recruit a German scientist who's actually from a neutral country. And he needs to convince him to defect to the Allies. And he does this by making an appeal to good and evil in a very interesting way that might remind you of something from the Star Wars prequels.
But certainly it means something to you whether your work is put to the use of good or evil.
The Germans think they represent the good, and the French are evil. I'm a scientist, not a philosopher.
Anakin, Chancellor Palpatine is evil! From my point of view, the Jedi are evil!
I was hoping that would get a laugh.
World War I is a unique conflict because it's a little murky about even just what it's about. And they even comment on this in Young Indiana Jones, that the people fighting conflict weren't even sure why they were there. And that's a point that Lucas really wanted to make, is that, like, for the soldiers, there's not a lot of difference, that it's unclear. They have to believe that the people they're fighting for are fighting for the good. But if you actually ask them to take a step back and ask why, many of them wouldn't be able to.
Here's a brief moment from an episode that is probably one of the more well-regarded episodes of the series, that is about the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. And it's a brief moment between Indy and a German soldier who is now serving as a peace delegate.
You were at the hotel the night we arrived.
Yeah. Sorry about what happened back there.
We were expecting it in the streets, but not here. Why do they insist on humiliating us?
I guess so you'll know what they've suffered. So you won't forget.
I fought at Verdun. I shall never forget.
I fought at Verdun too.
You know then, but I wonder, do they?
Maybe in the future.
The future? We shall have no future if those old men have their way.
It might seem ironic for someone who created a franchise called Star Wars, but Lucas is not pro-war. He is, if anything, anti-war. And what we see here in this clip is, when referencing the old men, it's this notion that, like, the soldiers themselves are just pawns in a larger game, that the old men are the ones that are promoting the war, that are in some ways profiting off of the war. And if anything, like, Lucas would rather tell stories about, like, about peace.
Yeah. And I think Star Wars doesn't really dwell on this in as literal of a way as Young Indy does. But I think particularly in the prequels, there's more melancholy about war and a weightiness to it that you see reflected here.
Now, World War I is a really interesting comparison compared to the Star Wars prequels, because that is a conflict where soldiers were literally being ordered to rush into machine gun fire very directly and just be mowed down constantly. And the allegory that we have with the Star Wars prequels is the clones themselves are kind of faceless soldiers. They are identical people in many ways, how the governments or the politicians viewed soldiers during World War I.
Which leads into this next clip, which is about this idea that Peter's talking about, which is leaders and governments using or taking advantage of people. In this clip, Indy has just had a negative experience operating as a spy in Istanbul. You saw that clip earlier. And he's being debriefed, and he has some words for his superiors. This is a new scene that was done for the extension, written by Jonathan Hales.
Our job is merely to serve.
Serve? No, this isn't serving. You're using people. You use people as long as it suits you, and then you throw them away. And if somebody gets hurt, well, that's just too bad, isn't it?
Captain Defense, you forget yourself.
Anakin, I'm appointing you to be my personal representative on the Jedi Council.
Me? A master? I'm overwhelmed, sir.
But the council elects its own members. They'll never accept this.
I think they will. They need you. More than you know.
So here, the comparison here is, again, Young Indy being very direct, very didactic. This is an example. We all saw this movie. We knew that Anakin was being used, right? That's what the music's for. Like it's, you know it. He doesn't know it, right? And how many people are in that position of maybe being praised, being told that they're unique, that they're important, and they have a role to play, and they're actually being taken advantage of. So this is just an idea that Lucas, as he's meditating on these things, is really trying to get across in this material. Oh, this is this is a good clip. I think we're just going to play it. This is a monologue from a character in the Peace episode, cut to some footage from Star Wars that we think make a great point together.
It's just not fair.
It's not about fairness. It's about power and greed.
Well, then why did we fight in the war? Why did so many people die? Are you saying that it was all for nothing?
No. No war is for nothing. But when it's over, it turns out to be something quite different from what was believed at the start. And the result is never intended to be what it is.
Again, the idea here is that that statement is a thematic statement that you could apply to the prequels.
The notion that the Jedi were just pawns in this larger game, and even the Separatists as well were being manipulated to create a conflict which then could benefit a single individual, is a distilled version of what we see in Young Indiana Jones, where a conflict is created by politicians over reasons that are still unclear. I mean, for a lot of people about World War I, and yet a certain amount of people benefited from it after the fact.
Absolutely. And that takes us to this next clip, which Indy is speaking to a diplomat about an experience he had earlier in the series. It's a great moment of continuity, both episodes written by Jonathan Hales. And we contrast that with, or compare it, I should say, with something that Obi-Wan Ewan McGregor says in Revenge of the Sith.
Didn't you hear me just now?
Yes, sir, I heard. And I also heard what you said about presidents, about how they come and go. And it reminded me of an old man I met in Mexico once who said pretty much the same thing.
Oh, he did?
He was a peasant. Most likely he's dead now. I don't even know his name. But I'll never forget what he told me. It's maybe the reason I'm here now. He said the men in power change, but the people go on suffering.
Look, Jones.
Sir, I really think the Vietnamese ought to be heard.
He was deceived by a lie. We all were. It appears that the Chancellor is behind everything, including the war. Palpatine is the Sith Lord we've been looking for. After the death of Count Dooku, Anakin became his new apprentice.
What we see here is really honing in on Lucas's philosophy about war, is that like the people suffer no matter which side you're on, while the 1%ers still manage to profit.
Or in this case, the Chancellor of the Republic.
A single one.
This continues as a great episode. That's Christopher Lee there, another cast member that is in both the series and the prequels. Indy is assigned to go to Austria to help negotiate a secret peace between the Austrian government and the French government in an attempt to end the war. Christopher Lee plays a politician who is perhaps trying to undermine the Austrian emperor's desires for peace because he finds it politically inexpedient.
Millions of people are dying, Chernin, and all you're concerned about is covering your own flank.
Young man, I'm less concerned with covering my flank than covering the Emperor's.
And don't forget, she's a politician and they're not to be trusted.
She's not like the others in the Senate, Master.
It is my experience that senators focus only on pleasing those who fund their campaigns. And they're in no means scared of forgetting the niceties of democracy in order to get those funds.
Not another lecture. At least not on the economics, politics.
Now, what this kind of hones in on is that politicians, even if they come at it from not selfish endeavors, still end up minimalizing the value of the individual when they're thinking about thousands or millions of people, which gets to the core of Lucas's philosophy as well, is that like the value of the individual, which I think is going to be our next clip here.
Yeah, this is another, also from an episode, a trench warfare episode, where Indy is speaking with some British officers.
I thought we were waging war for peace, for freedom. But there are men in England, Corporal de France, who have motivations that are entirely different.
What?
Money. The industrialists, the makers of arms, have every desire to keep this blasted thing going.
Well, that's a bit strong.
Is it?
I think you can kiss your trade franchise goodbye.
This gets talked about almost with every single conflict, but the people that make money in war are the arms dealers, are the capitalistic ventures in the government. In Young Indiana Jones, it does get talked about very specifically, but also in the prequel trilogy, the wonderful scene here, but also with the banking clan scene and Attack of the Clones.
Yeah, he hits it on the head a lot, and especially if you've watched the Clone Wars series, you see a lot of it. We're going to try to move very quickly. We have one more clip we want to show. It's a very important clip. The heart of Young Indy and sort of the moral message of Young Indy is in the middle episode. It's the 11th episode of the 22 film run. Indy is in Africa, and he's had a horrible experience in the jungle. They've lost a lot of men. There's definitely shades of Heart of Darkness in this. Lucas famously wanted to make Apocalypse Now, and this episode in some ways is his Apocalypse Now. But Indy meets Albert Schweitzer, who's a true historical figure, which actually I should have mentioned. There's a lot of true historical figures in this series. And Schweitzer is a great one. And the actor here gives to Indy sort of a dramatic reading of what Schweitzer's actual philosophy was. And we compare it with some scenes from The Phantom Menace. And I think if you take them together, you're going to understand sort of what we've just shown you some criticisms perhaps Lucas had for the government and the society. But I think if there's a positive, message he has or some guidance he's trying to offer, I think you can find it here.
The thinking man looks into his heart and he recognizes this truth. I'm life, which wills to live. In the midst of life, which wills to live. Look around you, soldier. Life is everywhere. It creeps, it flies, it writes symphonies, it builds cathedrals, but most of all, it wills to live and go on living. The thinking man gives every life the same reverence that he gives his own.
But sometimes taking life is inevitable. To eat, I have to hunt. To survive a leopard's attack, I have to shoot it.
If you want guidelines, you've come to the wrong place. Reverence is a state of mind, not a set of rules. All it requires is everything be done in deep awareness. Good is whatever promotes life. Evil is whatever destroys it. From there, you make your own decisions.
A droid army is about to attack the Naboo. We must warn them.
We sound no like the Naboo. The Naboo think they so smarty. They think their brains so big.
Once those droids take control of the surface, they will take control of you.
Me sa no think so. They not know of ocean.
You and the Naboo form a symbiont circle. What happens to one of you will affect the other. You must understand this.
We should no care about the Naboo.
Qui-Gon, sir. I don't want to be a problem.
You won't be, Annie. I'm not allowed to train you, so I want you to watch me and be mindful. Always remember, your focus determines your reality. Stay close to me, and you'll be safe.
Master, sir, I heard Yoda talking about midi-chlorians. I've been wondering, what are midi-chlorians?
Midi-chlorians are a microscopic life form that resides within all living cells.
They live inside me.
Inside your cells, yes. And we are symbionts with them.
Symbionts?
Life forms living together for mutual advantage.
This scene has taken a lot of criticism, as you all know. But the metaphor here is this idea of interconnectivity and symbiosis, and that you cannot separate living beings from each other, that they are reliant on each other. Schweitzer talks about awareness and treating every life with the same reverence as one treats your own. That's the same message that Obi-Wan is trying to convince the Gungans of, that you can't just be like, whatever happens to them is not a big deal, that we're going to be fine. That's not true. You're relying on them in ways you don't even understand. You share a planet. You share an ecology. The idea of the midichlorians, again, is just that there are life forms that you're symbiotic with, that you need, that you don't really understand or comprehend, but it's important, and you have to have reverence for it. So I think, George has said a lot of things, but clearly he has a heart for that sort of thing. And you see that, as we wrap up here, again, the journey of this series, we started in the Phantom Menace and Young Indy, both children, innocent, going to explore the world, and both characters go through a period of darkness.
Mm-hmm. They both become disillusioned, disenfranchised with the world that's out there, and they start to think it's better just to do whatever serves me the best more than other people. Indiana Jones becomes a mercenary. He's talked about that. He's referred to as a gravedigger. And Anakin Skywalker becomes Darth Vader, which is a little more extreme, but still kind of that same notion. And then they carry on into the...
Both characters find their redemption through the love of family. Whether you look at The Last Crusade with Sean Connery, or you look at Crystal Skull with the reunion with Marion, Indiana Jones finds himself through that love with the members of his family. And, Anakin has to find redemption through self-sacrifice for his son. And through that sacrifice, the family unit that you see there is preserved. And then there's a reason that in Lucas's saga, that's where the story ends. Whatever you think of, what's come, it's an important point that this is the moral of the story.
It's that love of the individual, love, reverence for another life in many ways. This is salvation for both of these characters.
Yeah. Well, we actually had a clip, but we're not going to show it because we're out of time. But we have 5 minutes or 4 minutes if there are any questions. If not, thank you all for coming. We would love to. I'm actually going to take a picture with the audience right now because that's important. Peter, stand up. We're going to do one of those selfie shots. No, all right. If there are no questions, again.
Why don't we just play the clip?
All right, we'll play the clip if there's no questions.
No questions, we'll play the clip.
I've heard the rats often of the war. Most recently, tales of a French effort to capture a German position in the Lingenkopf, which is a mountain nearby. French sent wave after wave of men up the slopes. The slaughter went on for hours. By the time the French generals called off the offensive, they had lost 30,000 men. So these people can't comprehend 10 men killed. So how do I explain 30,000 French boys lying in heaps on the slopes of the Lingenkopf? The result of a morning's battle? Or the 7 or 8 million killed in the war so far?
Have you ever considered that we may be on the wrong side?
What do you mean?
What if the democracy we thought we were serving no longer exists? And the Republic has become the very evil we've been fighting to destroy?
I don't believe that. And you're sounding like a separatist.
This war represents a failure to listen. Now you're closer to the Chancellor than anyone. Please, ask him to stop the fighting and let diplomacy resume.
Don't ask me to do that. Make a motion in the Senate where that kind of a request belongs.
They have brought you to impress the Kyrwinians in friendship.
Well, that's what I don't understand. They just got finished killing each other.
They don't fight because they're enemies, they fight because the ghosts want them to. The ghosts require the battle.
Ghosts?
A ghost wants the battle, oh yes. If he doesn't get it, he'll bring sickness, blights to crops, droughts, floods.
Well, then it's all just a vicious circle. And the battles never stop.
Take your clue from the people, young man. They bear no ill will to each other.
The council has assembled. They are eager to hear your report.
Afraid. Not much there is to say of my journey.
So, nothing significant happened to you out there?
Yes. And no. To the end we are coming now.
Did your journey give you insight on how to win the war?
No longer certain that one ever does win a war. I am. For in fighting the battles, the bloodshed, already lost we have. Yet, open to us, a path remains. That unknown for the Sith is. Through this path, victory we may yet find. Not victory in the Clone Wars, but victory for all time.
Thank you, guys. Please check out our links here. Really appreciate you coming out. Thank you so much.